What's going on, Imperials? It's Emperor Cubone here. While some Pokémon stay the same forever, others evolve and change. But, even more than that, some of them can't help themselves and just have to keep on changing into different forms. So we'll take a look at which Pokémon can have different forms, and what it takes to alter them, if indeed they can change at all. The first Pokémon that could even be considered to have different forms in the first generation might be Nidoran, with having a male and female version of the same critter. However, this one is iffy, since they are classified under completely separate numbers in the Pokédex, so they're not technically the same at all, although they can breed. But it doesn't really matter because you can't change in between them. Their gender is locked in, so choose wisely depending on how you want the final evolution to turn out. The next Pokémon to have different forms was the symbol Pokémon Unknown. Once you go inside the ruins of Alph, you can find a surplus of different looking letter Pokémon to spell out all sorts of things. You can't change these forms, so you have to try and catch all 26 of them, and later they even added in some punctuation to make it just that tiny bit harder for anyone with that completionist itch. But seeing as how they all only learn the same single move, you might just be better off tracking down the ones that you think look cool. I still think that we could tweak Unknown to be a bit better, but as far as forms go, this psychic type is king. As if by some premonition of the impending weather wars, we next got the Pokémon Cast form. This small cloud Pokémon changes with different weather conditions applied into battle. It has a sunny form and becomes a fire type, a rainy form that becomes a water type, a snowy form that becomes an ice type, a sandy... Oh yeah, they didn't bother to give it a form for sandstorms. I know that those aren't actually made of clouds in real life, but guess what? Neither is the sun. As an in-game mechanic, this just leaves this tiny Pokémon incomplete, meaning it can't live up to its own gimmick. But if you think I'm being a bit too hard on it, just remember that if you have a shiny cast form, you would never know it once it changes forms, since they don't have any different colorings. I don't think they technically count as different forms, but we'll go ahead and note Spinda, who can have unique spot patterns on its head. These are determined by Spinda's personality value when it's generated by the game, and makes each one different. In total, there's over 3 billion different possible combinations for Spinda to have, which is just ludicrous. And unless there are some real enthusiastic Spinda fans out there, I'd imagine that it's likely that there are certain patterns of Spinda that have still never been caught within the game. Now we get to a legendary Pokémon with the otherworldly Deoxys. This alien being came on a meteor and has plenty of unique properties that are foreign to this planet, one of which includes changing its forms. Deoxys has its standard form, but can also change into attack form, defense form, and speed form. As the names state, these changes come with sweeping stat changes that allow Deoxys to switch between outrageous attacks, defenses, or speed, also making it incredibly versatile. Now, starting off was a bit strange because in Gen 3, you couldn't actually change the form in the game, but they were actually game-locked, meaning that Deoxys would be in its regular form in Ruby and Sapphire, it would be attack form in Fire Red, defense form in Leaf Green, and speed form in Emerald. Every other generation since, there's been a meteorite somewhere in the game that you can take Deoxys to and cycle through its different forms so that you can have them all. But now we get into forms that are a bit more complicated, starting with Burmy. This bagworm Pokémon covers itself with scattered items around the area. When you first meet it, it's covered in leaves. But if you were to go to a desert environment, it would get a sandy cloak. Or if you went into the city to battle, it would get a trash cloak. This change happens automatically just by battling in different areas. But the cloaks don't really change anything about Burmy except its outer appearance. That is, until it evolves. Now, a male Burmy will evolve into Mothim, and that'll be the end of it. However, a female will evolve into Wormadam. When Burmy becomes a Wormadam, whatever cloak it has at the time becomes permanent. This not only changes the type of the Pokémon, but even their potential movesets and their base stat distributions. So that's a lot of different forms for an otherwise pretty average bug line. Another perfectly ordinary Pokémon is Cherubi, the tiny grass type with the unsettling double head situation. But it evolves into Cherrim, who can either be super emo or overbearingly full of positive energy. Cherrim is usually in its overcast form, but once anyone calls sunlight onto the battlefield, Cherrim will blossom into its sunshine form, due to its signature ability Flower Gift, which also raises its attack and special attack, along with the allies. So Cherrim shares this in common with how Cast Form has its own sun form as well. Although I'm not entirely sure how its eyes start on its abdomen and then morph up to its head. Sinnoh also gave us Shellos, who has two distinct forms. These forms are known as the West Sea and the East Sea for obvious reasons. Mount Coronet and Sinnoh created a split in the population, causing them to diverge into the pink form that seems to be the default for the marketing, and the blue one, which is the one that I prefer. These differences carry over into their ground-type evolutions with Gastrodon. Obviously, these forms are not interchangeable, and sometimes even game-exclusive, to where you can't even get the other one, but you can continue to get the same version if you breed it as well. Now, Gen 4 also did something more with forms by adding gender differences within Pokemon species, for some new ones, but also for pre-existing Pokemon as well. Many of these were not drastically different, however some Pokemon run with this concept and have it change a lot, like how we've mentioned the different forms of Meowstic changing movesets. But I'm not going to go through every minuscule cosmetic change between genders, that's for another topic, but just be aware that they're out there. And of course we can't talk about forms without mentioning Rotom. This tiny electric trickster has made quite a name for itself by having numerous different iterations throughout the competitive scene, filling out different roles. The standard form of Rotom is an electric and ghost type, which is unique to this day, but originally, this was true for all of the forms of Rotom. Now these forms change their types, keeping the electric but changing out the ghost when you integrate it with different appliances. Rotom Heat becomes a fire type, Rotom Wash becomes a water type, Rotom Mow becomes a grass type, Rotom Frost becomes an ice type, and Rotom Fan becomes a flying type. They all share the Levitate ability, which is pretty useless on the flying one, but they can also get their own unique moves for their new types. But they will forget it if transferred to any other form. And of course, there's the extra Rotom Dex form that can't be used in combat, but it does have all sorts of useful features to help the player out. There are actually quite a few form changes down at the bottom of the Sinnoh Dex, and if you go all the way to Spear Pillar, you might be able to find Giratina, the Renegade Pokemon. But as opposing as Giratina looks already, it can change to its origin form. This is done by giving it the Greasiest Orb hold item that also powers up its moves. The standard original form is known as its altered form, whereas its alternate form is known as its origin form. Even though its altered form is what it originated with, it's kind of all backwards. There's also Shaman, whose forms I've discussed before, but there's the standard version of the Hedgehog called the Land form. But with the use of the Gracidia flower, Shaman can transform into its Sky form. It does gain the flying typing with this change, and it even rearranges some of the stats. But this is probably one of the most temperamental forms out there, because it reverts back a lot. Shaman will go back to its land form at night, if it becomes frozen, if you deposit it into the PC or into Pokemon Bank, and also when you put it in the daycare. So hopefully you won't be too dead set on keeping Shaman in Sky form, because due to its extreme fragility, that's probably a losing battle. And of course, there's Arceus, the creator of the Pokemon universe. Usually this creature of legend is a normal type, but given any of its various plates, can change into a different type altogether to be ready for any scenario. And as we've seen already, this transitioning works with the Z crystals of different types as well, so long as Arceus knows a move of that same type. And before we leave Gen 4, there's one more Pokemon to note. The Spiky-Eared Pichu is an exclusive to Heart Gold and Soul Silver. When taking a special event Pikachu-colored Pichu to the shrine at Ilex Forest, the Spiky-Eared Pichu will come out and join you. Now, it's said that this Pichu has traveled through time with Celebi, and somehow extensive time traveling has made it unable to evolve. But that was also their explanation for why this Pichu couldn't be transferred to any other games in the series, when in actuality it just wasn't programmed in. But the spiky-eared Pichu did finally reappear recently as an alternate costume for Pichu in Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, and you best believe that's the one that I use every time. For the sheer volume of Pokémon in Unova, there aren't a lot of standard Pokémon with forms. The first one is Basculin, who is an utterly forgettable water type to me, which is even more impressive since it has two different forms. There's a red striped form and a blue striped form. These were largely found in their own separate versions, but the forms cannot be interchangeable. The only real differences found between them is that they can have some different abilities from one another. Next is the very strong fire primate Pokémon, Darmanitan. This Pokémon normally is your standard second stage fire type, but with its hidden ability Zen Mode, it will change its form. When its health is below half, Darmanitan will shift into its Zen Mode, which cuts its speed but cranks up the defenses and special attack. And if that wasn't enough, it also gains an extra tool with the Psychic typing. Whether or not any of this is actually beneficial is up for debate, but it's certainly pretty unique as far as form changes go. Next we have Deerling and Sawsbuck, who have a typing that I never thought I'd see in Normal and Grass. But these deer Pokémon are tied heavily into the seasons introduced in Gen 5, in that they will naturally take on the form of whatever season it is, in the wild or in your party. Putting them in the box will keep them in the same form, and actually, since seasons were removed as a feature, whatever form Deerling or Sawsbuck might be in when they're transferred is how they will be locked from now on. I would definitely lean towards the winter form, but anytime they're in the wild and later gens, they do appear in the spring form. However, when they breed, they can still produce their other seasonal changes, if they've been imported. We also have the weird buff dudes flying around calling themselves Forces of Nature. Tornadus, Thundurus, and Landorus are all flying type legendaries, but they also have in common their possible Therian forms, which change them from primarily human-based to more animalistic. This change is done by using the Reveal class item, which somehow shows their dark reflections or something. And they also have ties with the now defunct Dream Radar system, with their Therian forms appearing there. But these forms do reconfigure the stats on all of these powerful Pokémon, and give them brand new abilities to distinguish them from the originals. Unova really seem to like legendary forms, so strap in because now we'll take a look at Kyurem. This Ice Dragon type is part of the main trio for Gen 5, with its new forms even being the box art covers for the second games. Kyurem can change forms by using the DNA Splicer item and fuse together with either Reshiram or Zekrom into White Kyurem and Black Kyurem respectively. This merging of the two Pokémon consumes the other legendary, actually removing it from the party until they separate again, which is required to move them anywhere since Black or White Kyurem can't be traded or transferred. These fused versions have different stats and can carry over other aspects such as their previous abilities and signature moves to differentiate the two forms from themselves and the original. Another legendary form is with Keldeo. Now this is probably one of the most inconsequential forms in the franchise, since Keldeo is always in its ordinary form except for when it learns the move Secret Sword. This is a signature move to Keldeo, but knowing it turns him into the Resolute form. But other than the move, it's a completely aesthetic change. Sure, it might be based in some coming-of-age storyline, but the only possible thing the Resolute form is good for is telegraphing a quarter of your moveset, so I don't really get it. Unova also gave us Metalwetta, a musical, normal, and psychic type. However, that's only what's known as its Aria form. If it uses the move Relic Song in battle, it can change between that form and its Pirouette form. Obviously, the name has it more focused on dancing as opposed to music, turning it into a normal and fighting type, while also greatly increasing the physical attack and speed. But that's only possible in battle. At all other times, it defaults to its Aria form. And real quick, this is incredibly minor, but Genesect can technically have some different forms, but it's really purely cosmetic, with the different drives that you can equip onto this prehistoric cyborg. The only thing that it changes is the type of the move Techno Blast. Now we get to a whopper, Vivian. This is just the regional bug from Kalos with nothing too special about it, except for the fact that it comes in tons of different color patterns. But it's not just random. These different forms are based on the real-world locations of your DS, meaning that your geographical region would have a unique corresponding butterfly creature. The patterns are called Archipelago, Continental, Elegant, Garden, High Plains, Icy Snow, Jungle, Marine, Meadow, which is the one used in all the promotional material, Modern, which is the one that occurs in my region, Monsoon, Ocean, Polar, River, Sandstorm, Seacast form, it's not that hard to have a sandstorm form, Savanna, Sun, and Tundra. I'm not going to list off every single possible location for these patterns, but you can take a look at this list to determine where to trade from if you're wanting to get them all. And there were also some extra patterns given out in events, the Fancy pattern and the Pokeball pattern. So if you missed out on those, sorry, I guess. Another Kalos Pokemon to have forms is the Flabebe family. This minuscule fairy, along with its evolutions Floette and Florges, have different colors available for their flowers. This makes a lot of sense because they can actually correspond to the actual flowers in the overworld to be either red, yellow, orange, blue, or white. But the petal's appearance is the only thing that differs and it cannot be changed. However, there is data in the game for AZ's Eternal Flower Floette, resembling the ultimate weapon, and it has its own signature move called Light of Ruin, but it's never been officially released into the game. Kalos also gave us the other very fitting Pokemon of Furfrou. This Pokemon is essentially a poodle that you can groom into varying styles. You start with only being able to choose between Heart, Star, and Diamond trims, and with successive style points you can gain access to the Dandy, Matron, Debutante, Laren, Kabuki, and Pharaoh trims. But to me, it's never worth the trouble, since it costs $500 a pop, and Furfrou will just go back to normal after 5 days anyway. For a temporary cosmetic change, I can waste my money in much better ways. And of course, Gen 6 also brought us the ghostly terror Aegislash. This Pokemon is incredibly tough to battle due to its different forms. Its ability Stance Change allows it to shift between Blade and Shield form, alternating between 150s in attack or defense just by using offensive or defensive moves. But there are even more ghosts with forms in Kalos with Pumpkaboo and Gourgeist. It's hard to tell on their own, but these haunted gourds come in different sizes. There's small, average, large, and supersize, with HP increasing and speed decreasing proportionally with the growing sizes, along with rising attack for Gourgeist as well. Similar to other Pokemon forms, a certain size of these Pokemon will respawn that same size if bred. But an interesting fact is that any wild supersized Gourgeist will always be guaranteed to hold a Miracle Seed, giving you some more reason to try and look for that one. Xerneas, what are you doing? Oh yeah, okay. This one's really dumb, so quick as we can. Xerneas has a neutral mode and an active mode. Active is how we always see it in any media and even in battle, and neutral is just Xerneas when nothing interesting is happening, so let's just move on. Hoopa was one of the mythical Pokemon that came a bit later in Generation 6. But this Psychic Ghost type also came with another hidden form. When using the Prison Bottle item, Hoopa goes from what is apparently called its Confined form to the Unbound form. This towering Pokemon changes into a Psychic and Dark type, and it's given more power in its base stats and even adds new moves. But apparently it can be pretty tiring because after 3 days, it'll go back to its confined state. Gen 6 obviously introduced the brand new mechanic of Mega Evolution, which brought in a ton of new form changes for a bunch of older Pokemon. There were first several that were introduced in X and Y, and then they added in even more in Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, along with some primal reversions. But then they promptly shunted it to the back of the game in Alola, and just flat out removed it after that. But the franchise mascot Pikachu also got some new forms in the 3DS era, starting with the cosplay Pikachu. This was a contest-focused Pikachu that couldn't evolve or be transferred out of Oros, but the costumes each come with their own signature move as well. And as if that weren't enough, we also received Pikachu with all of Ash's various hats. It's a good way to be nostalgic for your favorite seasons of the anime, but other than a special C move, there's not a lot different here. Now you might have noticed that there are some other Kalos Pokemon that we didn't talk about yet, but that's because they only received their forms later on. Greninja was given the Ash Greninja form only starting in Gen 7. With the ability Battle Bond, Greninja can change its stats and the move Water Shuriken. To activate it, Greninja simply has to feint an opponent, and it will turn into its alternate anime version. But once the battle ends, it will revert back to normal. A similar situation occurs with Zygarde as well. In its native region, Zygarde is just kind of a big slug, but in the next games, it got a lot more complicated. Now there were tiny cells and cores that were scattered all about, but could be combined if you had sufficient numbers into the 10%, 50%, and 100% or complete forms. You can alternate between them through a lab out in the wild, provided that Zygarde has the Power Construct ability. And of course, if we're talking about Alola giving new forms to old Pokemon, we have to acknowledge regional variants. These Alolan forms give new typings and designs to certain Pokemon from Generation 1, providing some more variety for the pool of available Kanto Pokemon, by adding in more Ice, Steel, Dragon, Ghost, and any Dark types. But these Pokemon are locked in their regional states, with the only ones having potential options being the ones with unchanged base stages depending on where you evolve them. But now for the new Pokemon introduced from Alola, we see Oricorio, who from the very first trailer was shown to have different forms depending on which island it was located. The explanation for this was the different kinds of nectar on each island, meaning that you could grab some whenever you want and change Oricorio's type. And this also works with its signature move as well, Revelation Dance. We also have Rockruff, whose strict evolution methods can lead it to have 3 separate forms: Midday, Midnight, and Dusk form of Lycanroc. These forms are not interchangeable once they evolve, but you could choose between 2 of them before then. The third one is locked behind a special event-only ability to get the Dusk form. Wishiwashi brings us an interesting case in having this teeny solo form being able to change into the massive school form. The ability Schooling allows Wishiwashi, after level 20, to gain a huge boost in its stats, with hundreds of small fish working together. But you've got to be careful, because it will revert back to the timid solo form if its HP falls below 25%, making the battle even harder at that point without the giant cloud of backup. Much like the legendary Pokemon that it's based on, Silvally can have different forms as well. This man-made beast killer has the ability RKS system, which when paired with any of the various memory drives, can make Silvally into a different type. This will also change the move Multi-Attack to the same type, providing superlative diversity, allowing it to slide right into almost any team configuration. Next is a new favorite of mine, the small rock flying type Minior. This space rock has a unique ability in Shields Down that gives it heightened defenses and immunity to status. Once its health is below half, the outer shell will break and Minior will become much faster and offensively oriented. But that's not all, because there are many different colors of the inside of Minior representing all of the colors of the rainbow. But those differences are purely visual and can't be changed, so be sure to get your favorite. The unsettling Mimikyu also gives us a little flavor in form changes with Disguise. Mimikyu starts the battle with its disguised form. However, once it takes a hit, it will not receive any damage, but the disguise will break, with the rest of the battle being fought in its busted form. But by the time the next battle starts, it's fixed again, ready to provide that free turn. And finally, we come to the legendary Pokemon Necrozma. This Prism Pokemon is shockingly similar to Kyurem. Since using the items, the Insolarizer and Inlunarizer, Necrozma can fuse with either Solgaleo or Lunala to make the Dusk Mane form or the Dawn Wings form. which also become the mascots for a pair of second games. These forms of Necrozma gain a lot in their base stats, and also inherit the secondary types of the Pokémon that have fused. But even that's not all. If you give either of these Necrozma forms the Ultra Necrozma Z, it will become a giant shining monster of a dragon type. Ultra Necrozma gains well over 100 points in its base stat total from the standard Necrozma, as well as the Neuroforce ability that powers up its moves even more. Not to mention its Z move, the light that burns the sky, that pulls from whatever stat is Necrozma's highest and ignores all other abilities, meaning that this Ultra form is basically another Mega or Primal Reversion. And speaking of, Pokémon Sword and Shield coming soon are offering up a new feature called Dynamaxing, which causes a Pokémon to expand to incredible heights. But then there's also Gigantamaxing, that can change a Pokémon's form as well to become incredibly powerful. We don't yet know the extent of this energy in regards to changing Pokémon, but finding out other form changes and their possible methods of transition is a hallmark of the Pokémon universe, and is part of what keeps us coming back for more. So, those are all of the Pokémon form changes. Which forms are your favorites? Let me know down in the comments. Also be sure to leave a like, share this video, and subscribe so that you too can become an Imperial today. And we'll see you around next time!